Hi, I'm Clotilde, Performance Director. Google has now moved all analytics data to GA4, but a lot of marketers are still unsure about using it. In this video, I'll take you through the main differences between GA4 and Universal Analytics, the previous version, so you understand your data and can make better decisions. Then, we'll walk you through our most used reports to help you get the insights that matter to you. Let's get started. I'll now take you through a little presentation to explain the main differences between Universal Analytics and GA4. It's important to understand these slight differences because this will help you analyze your data correctly and make the right decisions. And it will help you understand why there might be some discrepancies when you look at your Universal Analytics data versus your GA4 data. So, first of all, the account structure. This is slightly different. In Universal Analytics, you used to have a main account, then within this account, you could have several properties, and then within the property, you might have several views. What we used to do for our clients is that we would create different views to separate the data. So, for example, we might have views by regions. You might have a UK view, and then you might have an all regions view. We would also use the views to filter your data. You might filter out some bots or some spam traffic, and then we would create a kind of master view with all your data as kind of a safety net. Now with GA4, you don't really have this. You still have the account, and then you can have several properties within your account if you have like different websites, for example, but you can't have specific views. However, GA4 automatically filters bots and spam, so that should be taken care of. And then you can also enable what they call developer or internal filtering. This means that you can filter out anything from developers when they do testing, for example, because you don't want to track that, or internal people who might be within your internal teams. So this is useful. However, if you had some regional views, what you might want to do is create specific segments so that you can still analyze your data by region. Even better, what you might want to do is actually create a Looker Studio report. It's free, it's linked directly with Google, and then you can filter your data the way you want it for the regions you want. Okay, so now the biggest difference between the two is hits versus events. So Universal Analytics uses hits, so it sends a hit that will belong to each user and then each session. So every time something happens on your website, Universal Analytics will send a hit. With some of these hits, it might also send what we call events, and these events will have specific parameters. They usually have 4: a category. For example, it could be a form, an action, it could be submit, a label, it could be the name of the form, and then a value. If you know that this form submission is worth £10, you could add a £10 value. Now, GA4 is different in that it doesn't use hits anymore. Everything is an event. And so each event will have specific parameters associated with it. You can have up to 25 parameters, which is a massive difference compared to the 4 ones previously. And some of these can be automated as well. So things like page views might be automated, or demo form fields, for example, you might be able to automate that as well. And so you can see how you can start drilling down into your data much more than the events that we used with Universal Analytics. Okay, but what do events really mean? So there's a few things that you need to know. Now, events can be flagged as conversions, so you don't need to create goals anymore. Not all events will be conversions. A page view is probably not going to be a conversion, but a purchase or a form fill, you can now flag them in the system as a conversion. As I said before, your events can have up to 25 parameters. So we've got rid of the category, action, and label, but you can really drill down if you really want to collect a lot of information for specific events. Also good to know, GA4 will automatically collect certain events, so things like file downloads or video views. When you've got a search bar on your website, it will collect that as well. Outbound clicks. That's really useful because that means you don't have to set everything up. Right, another really important bit of information here, sessions. We all look at sessions. How many sessions have we had to the site? How much traffic is hitting our sites? Here, it's really important to understand the difference in sessions because the way they're collected and the way they're calculated is different. So in Universal Analytics, a session would end after 30 minutes of inactivity, after midnight, or after a campaign source has changed. So what does that mean? Well, if I hit a website at 11:45 and my session lasts 30 minutes, actually it's going to be counted as 2 sessions because I will go over midnight, which isn't really useful because actually it was just 1 session. And if I go onto the website via organic, and then I might go off the website, go onto Facebook, click on a social post from this website, this will be counted as 2 sessions. Now in GA4, big difference, a session will end automatically after 30 minutes of inactivity or when it times out. So there's no session ending after midnight, which is great, but it's also not going to count a new session when your campaign source changes in the middle. So as I said before, if I find your website organically, then I leave, then I go onto Facebook and then I come back, it will only count it as 1 session. So be very careful, and that's where you're probably going to see big differences between the two. One thing to mention as well is that you can increase the session timeout basically. So you could increase it from 30 minutes to however much you want. We would suggest potentially 4 hours because that gives enough time. So, these days people work from home or they get distracted, they need to take care of the kids in between or something. So they might get distracted whilst they're browsing. And so you might not want to start counting loads of sessions. So 4 hours usually will give you a good amount of time to make sure that you capture these distractions, basically. Also, you'll notice in GA4, a lot of reports and metrics will be split between sessions and users. Just something to bear in mind because they're 2 different things. A user is a person, like me. A session is a visit to the site. And so as a user, I might visit a website several times. So usually you'll have more sessions than users. Right, this is getting a bit technical, but it is very important when you're analysing your data. There's a lot of issues recently with privacy and GDPR, etc. And so Google have had to change the way they collect their data. This means that in some of your reports, you might see data thresholding. So you'll have a little triangle that tells you that the data has a threshold, and so you might not be able to see all your data. This can be annoying because you might see that you had 10 conversions when you look at one report, and then when you look at another one, it's just you've lost 2, for example, because the data is being reviewed and you can't see everything. The reason why Google do this is because they don't want you to be able to identify people who've converted. So everything needs to be anonymized. So if they think that this data might not be anonymous, they might apply thresholding to it, and so you're not going to be able to see it. So the missing data is really going to depend on your reporting ID, and this is based on how Google connects the dots between the touch points that people are using to visit your website and browse the web. So the first one is device-based reporting. So this means it's only based on one device, so you're not going to report between cross-device. And so each device or each browser is going to be seen as one user. So this isn't really representing the reality, because we all know I'm going to start browsing on my laptop, then I'm going to move on to my tablet, and then I might go onto my mobile and then back onto desktop. It's very messy, right? So Google can connect the dots, because they collect a lot of data, to figure out that it's me browsing through all these different browsers and these different devices. But if you use device-based, that's where you're not going to have this. So you will not have cross-device reporting. This means that you might count more users than there were actually. However, if you use device-based, you shouldn't have data thresholding, because you cannot really connect the dots, and so you cannot really identify who's who. Then you have observed reporting. This is where Google fills in the gap to figure out who is the same user across devices and browsers, etc. So it will look at things like user ID when you're logged into Google, something called signals, which is Google using a lot of AI and machine learning to figure out, oh, where is this IP, where is this person, what's their history, browsing history, etc., to figure out if they're the same person. And then the device ID, so figure out if they keep using the same devices. However, you need to be careful, because sometimes the attribution around the observed method is a bit weird and it doesn't seem to always work. So be very careful with this. So you should have, with observed, you should have a better idea of a good number, like the actual number of users, but you might still have data thresholding with this. And then the final one is blended. So it's very similar to observed. You still, like Google is still filling in all the gaps with user ID, signals, and device ID, and it uses modeling to avoid privacy issues. So very complex modeling with AI, machine learning, etc., to fill in the gaps, basically. So, little recap on this, because it's quite complex. But basically, whenever you see a little triangle on your report, that means that there is data thresholding, and so that means that you might be missing some data. Good news is you can switch between these reporting IDs without affecting your data. So if you see a report that has this data thresholding, you can go into your settings, switch back to device-based, for example, so that you have all the data available in there. However, pros and cons, so you'll have all data available when you do this, but you might be over-reporting on users. And reverse, if you use observed and blended, you will be probably more accurately reporting on users, but you might have to deal with data thresholding. It's really up to you. The more data you collect, the less impact data thresholding will have, because the more data you have, the more anonymous it can be, etc. But if you're quite a small website or a niche website and you don't get many conversions, for example, it might be a pain with the data thresholding, so you might need to switch back to device-based from time to time. Okay, data attribution. So again, another difference between Universal Analytics and GA4 is the attribution. So Universal Analytics was mostly last click. Now GA4 is data-driven, which means that it will assign conversions to the most valuable path. This is probably going to create a lot of discrepancies in terms of how many conversions you're counting with different platforms, etc. But it's very important to understand. Data-driven is a great approach because it gives you a much better understanding of touch points and which channels are performing. So it's not a bad thing, but you just need to be aware it's different. Some things you might notice as well is that some reports will have different data attribution. So be careful when you look at a specific report to understand which attribution it's using. A good example is the acquisition reports. The user acquisition will use first click. It means that it will attribute all the conversion, the value of the conversion to the first click, the first interaction. The session acquisition is going to use last click. So here it will attribute all the conversions to the last click. So very important when you look at these reports to understand this, because it will change the way you get insights from it, and it will change the way you make good decisions. Metrics and dimensions. I've had a lot of questions on this because Google have changed quite a few different metrics, different dimensions. Some of them have been renamed, some of them disappeared. Everyone panicked when bounce rate wasn't in there, but now it's back in. So there's been a lot of kind of issues or anxiety around these. So we haven't put everything on here, and things are likely to change as well because Google keeps improving the platform. But here are kind of like the main metrics and dimensions that might have changed. So users, you still have total users and new users, but now you also have active users in GA4, which is quite interesting because it is users who have had an engaged session. So that can be quite a nice one to report on, because you might have a lot of users that aren't really engaging. And so if you start having a lot of active users, that's a really good sign. Simple one, page views are now called views. And unique page views have disappeared. Then you have, so I've talked about active users or engaged users. You now have engaged sessions as well. What does this mean? Well, an engaged session is a session that lasted longer than 10 seconds. It had one or more conversion events, or it had 2 or more page or screen views. So you can tell people have stayed on for more than 10 seconds, they've either converted or they've moved to like different pages, so they're a bit more engaged. That's also great insights to see if people are engaging with your website. And so from the engaged sessions, you now have an engagement rate, which is actually a much more positive way of looking at things compared to the bounce rate. So the engagement rate is actually the reverse of the new bounce rate. Now on to bounce rate. I know a lot of people sometimes obsess a little bit about this one. So bounce rate is now different, so be careful how you report on this as well. In Universal Analytics, the bounce rate was the percentage of single page sessions in which there was no interaction with the page. What does that mean? That means if I visited a page, read what was on it, didn't click anything, didn't trigger any hit, and then went off the website, that would be counted as a bounce. It's not great, because if I'm reading a blog, I'm going to be counted as a bounce, but actually I've read the blog. That was kind of the goal of the page, so it's not necessarily negative. Now, the bounce rate is the percentage of sessions that were not engaged. So it's a much better way to look at it, because we know that, if you stay on the page for a little while, well, you might still be engaged. So that's still a good thing. So now the bounce rate is the kind of contrary to the engagement rate, and it's a little bit better. Last one is page speed. Unfortunately, that's gone. There's a way you can calculate it, or you can kind of create a metric on it with Google Tag Manager. So if you're curious about this, or if you'd like to know more, you can contact us and we can help you set this up. Right, so to finish this little presentation, just bear in mind that GA4 is still kind of a work in progress. This might change depending on when you watch this video. We're in July 2023, so at the moment we still think it's a work in progress. There are still a few things that aren't there. There have been recent changes as well that were implemented. So things like annotations, which is really annoying, but they're gone. We're really hoping that they'll bring this back, but unfortunately we don't really know at the moment. So we're going old school and using spreadsheets to capture what changes we've made to the website. They've recently added like custom channel groupings and content groups. So things can get added, afterwards. So we'll see what new features get added. And then another thing you'll probably notice is that there are fewer reports and they're very much simplified. But there are ways that you can customize them, or that you can create other reports, and we'll go through this afterwards in this video. One main thing that we've said to most of our clients is that if you're reporting regularly, we would really recommend to use Looker Studio for like recurring reports, and then create a dashboard basically with all the metrics that you want, because it's a great visualization tool. It's free, it connects with most platforms, especially Google, and then you can get connectors for other platforms so you can bring your data together, and it's really easy. And then every month, every week, you can just see what you need basically.
Hiya, I'm Kyle and I'm a Biddable and Analytics Executive here at Innovation Visual. When navigating the GA4 interface, you'll probably notice quite a lot of similarities between Universal Analytics, but at the same time it can feel a bit confusing and maybe even overwhelming when you're trying to find some of your most used reports. For the most part, all of the same data is still visible within GA4, and it can even be customized to show exactly what you need within each report. So I'm just going to be taking you through some of the most commonly used reports within GA4 so you know where to find them and how to use them. And also showing you how to tweak some of the reports so you can easily see all of the data you need. Okay, so when you first visit your GA4 property, you will have the reports section you can visit. And this is where you'll notice a few of the similarities with Universal Analytics. So you still have your acquisition, engagement, monetization, and first of all we're going to focus on the acquisition. So within here we have the traffic acquisition report, and as we scroll down you can see all of the default channel groups which have visited your site. So it's worth noting that the traffic acquisition and user acquisition will both use their own attribution methods. So user acquisition will focus on the first click that brought the user to your site, whereas the traffic acquisition will be the last click. So within here we can click this drop down menu and we can change over to use source medium, just the medium, the campaign name. So there's a few different options here to choose from. So if in this example we choose source medium, and then you can see it's changed everything over to show the source medium of traffic that's visited your site. So as an example, we can use the search bar and search for something specific, such as Google CPC traffic. And we can even use this blue plus icon here to add a secondary dimension. So in this example, we can look for country. And then from there, with some simple adjustments to the one report, you can see we're now looking at traffic that's come to the site with the Google CPC source medium, and we can see the country that they've come from. So the next report we can take a look at is the user acquisition. And as we just mentioned, this is going to be looking at the first user click that brought them to your site. So again, as we scroll down, you can see by default, it's showing us the first user default channel group. But again, this can be changed to show source medium, platforms, campaigns, etc. So as an example, if we change this to the first user medium, we can see the breakdown here of CPC, organic, referral, and email. So we've still got the options available to us as we had in the traffic acquisition report, where we can use the search bar here and also add secondary dimensions. But we can take this level of customization one step further. So we can see here we have comparisons, so we're currently seeing all users. So we can click to add a comparison and we can choose from a list of things. So we're going to use device, and you can see there's a load of different devices we can choose from that have all visited our site. So we could perhaps do a search for let's go for the Fire 7 tablet and apply that. So now what we're seeing is a comparison between all users which visited the site within a certain medium compared to users which visited the site on a specific device. If we don't want to see the comparison and we just care about the specific device itself, we can actually remove this. We can actually add a filter here. So within the filter again, we can just say device. We can click the appropriate device, and if I bring the camera back up and hit apply, you can now see that rather than seeing the comparison between all users and a set device, we're just seeing users of a certain device. So this is good to really get granular into your data, make comparisons, or just see specific users, which can help you understand different things like user journeys and experience across your site. Okay, so moving into the engagement section of the reports and into the events report. So since GA4 is an event-based property, you'll notice a lot of differences when you compare it to Universal Analytics. So for example, we're seeing lots of events here for page views, engagements, session starts. And if we go into a specific event, so let's go into session starts, you can see we're getting a lot of different information about these events that have come through. So it's being broken down by country, gender, and we even get some parameters here, such as the page titles, locations, etc. So if we go back to the overall event report again, we can once again still use the search bar. So if we just search for the session starts, and we can add a secondary dimension in here. So if we add in the page referrer, you can see just like that, we're now looking at all sessions which have been started on our website, and we can see the referrer they've come from. So the conversions report within GA4 is going to be very similar to what you know with goals in Universal Analytics. So inside this report here, we can see a bunch of event names. So these are all events which have been marked as a conversion. So the differences there between GA4 and Universal Analytics is that in Universal Analytics, you could define criteria for your goals. So you could give it rules such as if category equals, if label begins with, and so on. So you can get quite specific and create certain buckets. The difference within GA4 is that because it's an event-based property, you can only mark events as a conversion rather than defining criteria for it. So if we go into the admin section and have a look at conversions, you can see that a lot of these, such as add to cart, are just standard event names that we saw in the events report, and they've just been marked as a conversion here. So if we're looking to create some more specific and granular conversions, within the events section, we can create an event, and you can see some examples here. So these rules are saying things such as if the event name equals page view, and one of the parameters of that event of page location equals a set URL, we want to fire a completely new event called registration complete. So what we can then do is copy that new event name of registration complete, and then within conversions, we can add it as a new conversion, which then means within our conversions report, we'll then see that new event we've created here. The pages and screens report within GA4 will show us a breakdown of all pages on your website alongside some performance metrics. So we still have all the same tools available to us, such as comparisons, filters, adding in secondary dimensions and changing the primary dimension. You'll also notice that under metrics such as event count and conversions, we have another drop-down arrow. So at the minute, we can see that this is looking at all events being broken down by page. So an example of something we can do here is we can select a specific event that we might be interested in. So let's say first visit. We can change the page title to be page path, and then we can see which specific pages of our website are triggering the event first visit. So moving on to the e-commerce purchases report, which can be found within the monetization folder. This is where if you're running an e-commerce website, you can see the performance of your store as a whole, or even dive a bit more granularly into specific product performance. You'll be able to see metrics such as the items viewed, added to the cart, purchased, and the revenue that they generate. So if we're curious about the performance of a specific product, we can utilize the search bar. So if we take this dog toy example and do a search for dog toy, you can see we're now looking at just this specific product performance. And then if we want to go a bit further, we can add a secondary dimension such as the session source medium. So as we discussed earlier, this will be the last click that brought the user to your site. So we can now see that we're looking at the performance metrics for one specific product, and it's being broken down by the source medium. Now we're going to take a quick look into the demographics report, which is under the user section within user attributes. So this will show you a breakdown of who is visiting your site, and we can look at dimensions such as their country, language, gender, and so on. It's worth noting that a lot of these dimensions here are taking data from Google Signals. So depending on the reporting identity you're using, it might not always be entirely representative of your entire user base. So this report can be useful to learn who is using your website, and perhaps it can give you some insight into how to best cater to them. So one example could be if we change this to language, and then we can have a look at the engagement rate here. So we can change this to sort by lowest first. So you can see, as a quick example here, we might be able to look at the Persian language has quite a low engagement rate. So it might be worth just having a look into seeing how well our website is catering towards users of this specific language. The final report we're going to be looking at is the tech details report found within the tech folder. And whilst the demographic details report would tell you more about who the users are coming to your site, this report focuses more on the platforms that they use to browse your site. So you can see the primary dimensions let us choose between different things. So we can look at the browsers that they're using, the devices, their operating systems, and so on. So a good use case for this could be something such as looking at the device category. And similarly to the demographic report where we looked at the engagement rate, we can once again do this and decipher that tablet devices appear to have one of the lowest engagement rates. So that could perhaps trigger looking into the user experience of your website for tablet users, because evidently when you compare it to desktop or mobile, there is a slight lowering of the engagement rate. So that might just indicate that there's some user experience issues that you might need to investigate. Once you've got a feel for the GA4 interface and you're comfortable with where you need to go to see all the data that you need, you might notice that sometimes you're going into specific reports and always making some changes, tweaks, and adjustments to them. So rather than having to do this every time you click into a specific report, there is a more elegant approach that we can take. So in this top right hand corner here, we can click to customize the report, and you can see we're given a bunch of options to customize what we're looking at. So within dimensions, we can choose to make a different one, the default, so it'll always appear first, and then anything else which is left in the list we can use in the drop down arrow, or we can even remove anything else which you might not require. We can apply that. We can also do the same for metrics. So if we only want to see users, sessions, and conversions, for example, we can remove them, and we can also add in any other metrics which we might be interested to see. We can also add filters to the report by default rather than having to manually do this every time. So in this example, we could say we want to exclude session source mediums which are, let's say, containing not set, and apply that. Finally, we might decide that we want to add a secondary dimension breakdown. So we can add in the default channel grouping in this example. And there we go. You can see we've now customized the traffic acquisition report to instead show exactly what we want to see every time rather than having to manually configure it each time we go into it. So we can now click to save, and you can see we're presented with two options. So if we click to save changes to the current report, this means that every time we go into the traffic acquisition report in the future, we'll see this version that we've customized. We can also click to save as a new report, which will allow us to add a name to it, and we can have it in addition to the original one. So once we made edits to our report and customized it to our liking, you'll notice that as soon as we go back to our default reports that we have here, we can't actually see the new one that we've made. And if we go into the traffic acquisition report, which we edited, it's back to the default setup. So it's not how we changed it. So if we go into the library section, here you can see a bunch of different folders. So this is the structure of the reports in your account. So you can see here we've got lifecycle, which we have here on the side. And within that, we have acquisition, engagement, monetization, retention. So this is exactly what we're seeing here. So what we can do, we can say we want to edit this lifecycle collection, and we can search for the new report that we've just made. So I called this test example. We can drag this in and place it under whichever folder we like. So because we edited the traffic acquisition report, it's probably most relevant there. Now we can click save. We can make an entirely new collection. But in this example, we're just going to save our changes to the current collection. And now those changes have saved, we can back out. And then within the acquisition report, we see the new one that we've made with our customization. You can see straight away our filter is there applied. We've got the source medium with the secondary dimension as well, and the metrics that we chose to see. So once you've customized your reports to your liking and you save them as new, this is where you can go to add them into your interface and to also customize and tweak all the other folders and collections to get it just to your liking.